Hey folks, so in this video we're just going to look at what we call the last night paperwork. That is the paperwork that we go over in a traditional class on the very last night of class. But we're going to just go over this online since we don't meet, but it'll go over the requirements for completing the class, the testing requirements and the testing process, the different phases that you'll go through for your certification test. So hopefully this will answer a lot of your questions that you might have about the process, and if there's something you still have a question about, please feel free to call the office or send me an email. Here are the objectives for the video. We'll just take briefly a quick look at what you need to successfully complete the course and what that means, and then we'll take a look at the skills test and then the written test and everything involved with registering and what kind of information you need to register. So hopefully if you have, after this, if you still have questions, feel free to give the office a call. So again, what you need to successfully complete the course is have finished everything that we set forth in the syllabus. So completing all the didactic stuff, your lab things, for example. So once I have all of those items in your portal, I will generate an eligibility to test letter. To sign into your portal, if you haven't already, your username is that B number that you should have gotten when you enrolled in the course. Now if you didn't get it, or a lot of times it might go to a junk folder and you just didn't see it, then if you don't have your B number, the best place to go is to call the Office of EMS. If you call 804-888-9120, you're with the Education Department, and they can look that up for you pretty quickly. There's also a web page on the Office EMS website that will help you sign in if you haven't already signed in before. Basically your B number, in your case it'll be B 2016 probably, and then some other 5 numbers after that. And then they have a set password. It has something to do with your social and your birthday. But nevertheless, they have instruction on how to sign in. When you do sign in, there is a tab at the top called My Tests and Eligibility, and you click on your eligibility letters, and that's where you find your ETT, or your eligibility to test letter, and that is going to be your ticket to the CTS. CTS is short for Consolidated Test Site, and that is what we use. That is just the name of what we call the psychomotor test, or the EMT test site. That's where you'll do your skills test. A key date is 180 days. So you must initiate psychomotor testing within 180 days from the end date of the course. So if you're still missing some modules on Blackboard, that's okay, but you have to finish everything that you need to do, plus have time to register for a test within 180 days from the end date of the course. So psychomotor testing, again, must be initiated within 180 days of the end date of the course. After 180 days, there's nothing I or the state can do to allow you to test. Your eligibility letter expires after 180 days from the course, regardless of when you completed all the modules and all the other things, and I marked you complete. It's 180 days from the end date of the course. All skills testing in Virginia is done at the CTS site, the Consolidated Test Site. You must sign up on your own at testing.vaems.org. You can test anywhere in Virginia. and that's totally okay. The Odemsa region is a pretty good region for. They're known for having really good test sites, and that's who you've been working with, some of the test evaluators. So you may have been working with some of the test evaluators, so you know exactly how they're going to test. But again, you can test anywhere in Virginia. It doesn't have to be Odemsa. When you go to testing.vaems.org, you see this screen. You need to create a new user. We recommend using your B number, but it's totally up to you. You can come up with a username or use your B number just like you did for your portal. Once you create a new user, you'll put that username and your password in that you just created, log in. I would write that down somewhere, because if you have to retest or come back to this for whatever reason, you're not looking for your username and password. So you log in. Once you log in, you'll just click this thing that says find a test site, and this is filtered within the region Odemsa, but again, you can test anywhere in Virginia. That's where you filter it. You can check with Western Virginia, which I believe is the Danville area. I don't know if that's closer for some of you guys, but that is an option for you. But we have our test sites, at least 2 per month, and that's going to be on a Thursday night. And of course, we'll be down there on one day in July. So, and that should be on your list. This is an old screenshot. So just click the view button beside the test site that you want to do, and you'll be able to register. And I have a separate video on CTS registration, so see that in just a little bit. So entry into the CTS, you need to bring your letter, bring a government or school issued ID. So it can be your driver's license, a high school ID, a college ID, that's all fine. Watches or electronic devices are not allowed, and you might think, well, why not a watch? And the reason is because some people have been using Apple Watches, and that has a mechanism to record and things like that. So they just said no watches allowed. There are clocks in every room that we have the test is performed in. So there's a watch there, so you can do pulse and respirations, but you won't be allowed to wear your watch. There is no admittance to the test site after the start time. So in Odemsa, we traditionally have our test sites at 6 p.m. unless otherwise noted, but at 6:01 they lock the door and they're just not going to let you in. And that's these are really state rules that we have to comply to. So they're very strict about when the start time is, and not allowing anyone in afterwards. So it says 6, but really plan on being there at minimum 5:30, just to give yourself enough time to in case you have any delays. So now I go into some information about the skills test and how that process works. You guys already know by this point there are 3 stations that you're going to have to test: the medical, the trauma, and the random skills. What the state does is actually break off, you have an initial attempt and then a secondary attempt, and each attempt has a retest. So if in the initial attempt you take the 3 stations, the medical, trauma, and random, and if you were to not be successful on 1 or 2 of those stations, then you can have a retest. If you are not successful on the retest, or you don't take it within the allotted time, then you have to go on to your secondary attempt, which you would take the medical, trauma, and random skills stations again. So I go through that a little bit. You take your initial attempt, it's all 3 stations. You pass all 3, you move on to the written test. If you're not successful for whatever reason, and a lot of times you might get nervous, and a lot of times we see just nerves get you on one station or whatever. If for whatever reason you're not successful, You do have 90 days. If you don't take the retest in 90 days, it is no longer eligible to retest. So you have 90 days to take any retest on your initial attempt. Now on the retest, you only retest the stations you failed. So if you just for whatever reason failed medical but you passed trauma and the random skill, then on your retest you just go back and you would retest the medical station. Also on the random skill, if you're not successful on the random skill, you go back and you retest only that skill that you had. So if you picked traction splint, you failed that station, you go back for your retest, you only retest the traction splint. So you already know what your random skill will be. If you pass the retest, then you go right back to the written test, and we'll get into the written test information in a minute. If you're not successful, then you go to your second attempt. Now your second attempt, again, you're going to have to take the medical, the trauma, and the random skills all together. Or if you let that 90-day lapse, so you are eligible for a retest, and you let that lapse, you know what, that expires, and then you need to go to your second attempt, in which case you would take, again, all 3 stations. So again, initial attempt, medical, trauma, random. If you're not successful on the retest, or you let 90 days lapse on a retest, you go to your secondary attempt. However, there's a caveat. Before you go to your second attempt, you must get 40 hours of continuing education. And you do that through normal continuing education routes, or you can meet with instructors to get your continuing education. So your secondary attempt, again, you have to take all 3 stations again. You pass all 3, you go to the written test. If you are not successful, you get a retest, and that retest is good for 90 days. And again, you only retest the stations that you failed. If you pass that, you go off to the written test. However, here, if you are not successful, or you let that 90-day retest lapse, then you can't test again. And the only way you could become an EMT is if you repeat the EMT class. So pretty important dates to remember. You have to initiate testing within 180 days, or your eligibility to test expires and there's nothing we can do. Or your second attempt, if you're not successful and you have 90 days to retest. If you don't do that, if you let that lapse, then you have to repeat the EMT course. I will say that I've never had a student go that far. I have had students have to retest on the initial attempt, but I probably can only think of one time I've had them have to go through continue ed to go to their secondary attempt. So it's the tests are pretty laid back, and once you get your nerves out of the way, if you've gone through the skills several times, I'm sure. So I have no doubt that we won't have to go this far. But this is the policy just in case. So again, 180 days from the end date of the course. So absolutely no extensions, variances, anything like that. The state cannot budge on that, and they won't budge on that. So if you're not successful in your first attempt, you must retest. Again, only the stations fail within 90 days. Again, no exceptions. After 90 days, you must take your secondary attempt, or if you're not successful on the retest, you must take your secondary attempt. And then to get to your secondary attempt again, you'll need those 40 hours of continuing education. So that's just a summary of what we talked about. Another key date, you must complete your psychomotor test within 365 days from the end date of your class. So when you had 180 days to initiate testing, but then you have another 180 days effectively 365 days total to complete all of the retest, the continuing education if you have to go to a secondary attempt, and start and complete any retest 365 days from the end date of the class. So the written test, once you pass, again, the skills test, you go to the written test. This is the National Registry written exam. There's no score. You only get pass or fail. It's what we call CBT, computer-based testing. It's also computer adaptive testing, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The tests must be scheduled individually. You schedule at a Pearson VUE test site. There is one in Richmond. I believe there's one in Danville, and there might be one in North Carolina. You can absolutely test in a different state. The only thing you have to do in Virginia is the skills test. So the cognitive test is what they call the computer adaptive test. So it's adaptive. What that means is it adapts to your level. It's broken into 5 areas. Those are the 5 areas that the National Registry is broken into. When you go to paramedic, it'll be the same way. We have the same basic areas: airway, cardiology, trauma, medical, and operations. So it's adaptive, meaning that if you answer questions correctly, they're going to get harder. And there's different levels of hardness of a test question from 1 to 6. And if it might shoot an airway question that is a hardness level of like 3 or 4, and if you answer it correctly, they're going to go up to the 5 and maybe the 6 level, to where they get really hard. And I'm going to tell you, it does adapt to your level, and you're going to leave the test thinking that you failed, because the test will get harder. So if you're answering questions and you're answering them correctly, they're going to get harder, and you're going to think you're failed, because at the end, you're going to just get these questions that are so detailed and really specific that you can't even believe a thoracic surgeon is going to know. So it will definitely get harder. So just don't panic if they're getting really hard and you're thinking you're really having a hard time with this test. It's supposed to do that. Again, if you're answering questions incorrectly, it should get easier. So you should see questions that are at your ability, and definitely challenging. No one really understands or knows the algorithm on if you get a bunch of hard questions wrong, you may still pass. If you get a bunch of easy or half the easy questions wrong, you might actually fail. So it's this complicated algorithm taking into account the ones you get correct and the hardness of that question. So it's again, if you get really, really hard questions, it just means the computer has adapted to your level and you are being challenged. So don't worry about that. You must pass all 5 sections independently, so it's not like you can do really horrible on medical but do well on the others and still pass. Now you have to pass each section independently. So you'll either get a pass, near pass, or fail on each section when you get your results. You'll either get one of those 3 things. So registering for the cognitive test, create an account on the NREMT website. And another suggestion is to make it the same as your OEMS portal username and password, so your B number and whatever pass number you use. And the reason is because if you choose to keep your national registry, you'll be certified Virginia and National Registry. If you don't have to, but if you choose to keep it, you'll have that same username for as long as you're certified at the National Registry. So if you have both, if you choose to keep both your National Registry and Virginia, then at least your accounts are going to be the same. But again, that's up to you. You can have it as whatever you want. When you'll create an account and you'll log in, and you'll create an application for EMS certification. If you're under 18, you're going to follow a different procedure, so let me know if you're under 18. I can get you that information. When you successfully complete the skills test, your course coordinator will validate your skills in the National Registry EMT portal. So in this case it's Holly, so when Holly sees that you've passed the skills test, and you have an application on file at the National Registry, she will go in and mark you as complete for the skills test. What that will do is that will give you an authorization to test letter, ATT, in your National Registry portal. And that is your ticket to register and gain entry to the Pearson VUE test site. I know, very complicated, all these different steps. So another key date, you must complete cognitive test within 365 days from completing your skills test. So I think other than the retest issue, the common thread here is 180 days. You must initiate testing. You must complete skills tests within 1 year of the class, and then you must complete cognitive testing 1 year from completing your skills test. So just keep those in the back of the mind. And these, we do see a lot of providers that get really close to these, and even some that go past these, and then there's just nothing we can do. So your National Registry EMT exam, you're allowed 3 attempts to pass the cognitive test. That's not true. You're actually allowed 6 attempts, but before you go to the 4th attempt, you have to have a 24 review session with your course coordinator, and that should identify what areas you're having a hard time in and how you can improve. Candidates who fail the 6th and final attempt, there's nothing you can do for that. So some accommodations, if oral testing is not allowed, we went over this for the first night paperwork that was included in the ADA information, but oral testing is not allowed. The most that they would give you is time and a half for a documented learning disability or reading disability. But if you do have a question about accommodation, you want to ask the National Registry about that, you must submit an ADA request to the NREMT at least 3 weeks before, I see a typo there, before the test date. And more information about that policy can be found on the National Registry website. And if you have any questions, please let me know and I can point you in the right direction. Steps to take the National Registry cognitive exam. So again, you're going to create an account at National Registry. We already talked about that. You'll log in, manage your account information, make sure your name is the same as it appears on your ID. That really pertains to some students might have gotten married between the start of the class and the end of the class. Make sure your name is going to be the same as it appears on your ID. So you may have gotten married, but you haven't changed your name yet, or you haven't changed your ID. Don't do it until after the National Registry test. Unless you change your ID, that's fine. But if there's a gap between or a delay between changing your ID, they're not going to let you in to the test site if it's different from what's on your authorization test letter and your ID. So make sure those are the exact same. Create a new app. You're going to click create a new application. Create a initial entry application is what it specifically is. And the first attempt, you don't pay. Virginia Office EMS pays that first attempt. Speaking of application fees, if you have to reschedule, you might have to pay for the rescheduling fee if you don't show up for your test. The Office EMS will actually bill you for no show. So make sure you schedule your exam carefully. Make sure you're off that time, you don't have any conflicts, and you're good to go. Obviously, emergencies happen, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just not showing up for your exam, or if you have to reschedule, they might even charge you for a reschedule fee. Steps second and subsequent test, the candidate assumes all costs for that. Virginia doesn't pay for that. Right now it's $80 per attempt. They just raised it, so I don't think they're going to raise it again for another few years, but it is $80 per any subsequent attempt. So once you are approved to take your exam, you'll print the ATT letter. That means you're verified to test. If you don't see a link, that means the verification process has not been completed. Contact Holly. And a lot of times it's because when you pass your skills test, we're not notified by email, other than we'd have to log in and download a report to know that you passed. So if you do, when you find out you passed the skills test, send Holly an email saying, hey, I'm passed, can you approve me in the National Registry? You can do your portal application now, actually. You don't have to wait. It'll just set in Holly's portal until you have completed your skills test. So again, if you don't see the stuff that you are supposed to, then talk to Holly and get your ATT letter. Once you print your letter, you will see instructions on how to schedule your exam through a Pearson VUE website. And again, it's going to be another website that you have to create a username and password. It's a Pearson VUE. If you go to pearsonvue.com/NREMT, you can kind of see some of the instructions that you're going to have to go through once you get your ATT letter. So just some recaps here. Schedule your exam carefully. Scheduling fees apply. Just want to make sure you guys are aware of that, as well as that the refunds aren't issues for no-shows. In fact, OffCMS will charge you for if that's the first attempt. If you arrive late, you might lose your appointment. Remember that the course coordinator must have all coursework completed before you go test. Your skills test is done at a CTS in Virginia. You must bring your ETT letter. It must be initiated within 180 days of the end date of the course, which for you guys is going to be June the 30th. And then retest must be done within 90 days of your first attempt. You must finish testing the cognitive 1 year from the date you passed your skills test. Cognitive are developed by the National Registry, administered by Pearson VUE. You'll need your ATT letter to entry into the cognitive exam, and again, you get that through your NREMT portal. And I'll just close with some good advice as to stay calm. The exam will adapt to your ability. So if you've done really well in the course with the questions, you will leave that exam thinking that you failed, and just keep calm. You're going to do fine. I have 100% first time pass rate for people who complete the online class. So people who complete an online class are traditionally people who are kind of independent studiers and do really well a lot of times with testing. So I have every confidence if you've gotten to the end of class, you've done all this work so far, you're that type of person who's going to go in and knock this out. Now if you want to have some more opportunity to test yourself, there are some online programs like the JB Learning EMT Pass. It's a test prep package, as well as the Limmer Creative makes applications that you can test yourself. And there's also one called medictests.com, medictests.com. You can purchase an account. I think it's a 30-day subscription for, I don't know, $20, and you can just take practice exams and see how you do. The general consensus is that if you're doing about 80% consistently, if you're getting about 80% of the questions correct consistently on those types of test preps, then you're totally fine for the National Registry. So if there's any questions, just reach out to me or the office, 804-560-3300, or my email. And then at this point, Holly is going to have a more active role in the completing, because she is technically the course coordinator, so she's going to have to complete that paperwork for you on that side. But and that's hsturdivant@vaems.org, or you can just reach her at the office here. So just let me know if you have any questions, and see the other video on registering for your test site if you have any more questions. Take care. Good luck.